start by telling you a little bit about Lee and his background. And as I thought about today's introduction to Lee, I tried to think of a word that would represent Lee and the work that he has been doing and the presentation that he's going to be making, and the word circuitous came to mind. First, Lee took a circuitous route to a career in information technology, and he started with law school. From there, he worked his way to both U.S. coasts, 4 years in Australia, and 30 years, sprinkled by travels, including a 13-month, 39-flight around the world backpacking adventure. So he is no stranger to reaching out there. Second, his IT career started with punch cards and worked its circuitous way to cutting-edge product development and marketing, culminating by retiring from Intel in 1997. Then he started yet another circuitous route. That's what he's going to share with us today. In 2005, he started a new charter sailing venture and made a business out of it. And made a business out of his wanderlust with a 47-foot catamaran named Worldwide Traveler. He's here with his logo wear and some samples from those voyages. It's also the name of his company and his mantra for his adventures. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Lee Adamson, who will give you his 6-year, 32,000-mile adventure, and I think maybe final circuitous route, but maybe there'll be another one.
Well, at least here. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll start out with this. I was living in Portland, Oregon, and I had been working for Intel, and I had retired, and it all began there. I was growing tired of being retired, and I was dreaming of sailing adventures, but just not any sailing adventures, with my friends. I wanted to introduce them to what I knew as the sailing dream. So what I did was I sold my house and flew to Florida. Florida, my brother lived there, and I moved into my brother's Airstream trailer. And for 3 months, I looked around for the boat that I had already gone to boat shows in Miami, so I knew exactly what I wanted. And it was a Katana 471, a 47-foot catamaran. And I named her Worldwide Traveler after the website that I had created for the backpacking trip around the world. This is a video of the boat. Rather than show you still pictures, I thought I'd show you this. This is the inside of the cabin, showing the galley, the table where we could sit 6 people easily, and then off to the left is the navigation station. Going down into one of the hulls, that hull, it was this one hull is for the owner, that was me, and the other hull had 2 double cabins for guests. Here's the cockpit. This table could seat 8. That was where all the sails were raised from, and here's the deck. I bought the boat and immediately took off. This was in Florida. This is going out of Fort Lauderdale. I went first for a shakedown in the Bahamas, and then up to my cousin's house in Beaufort, South Carolina. He has a place right on the water there. And it was there that I found Wendy. I started this trip alone and had the help crewing of my cousin. And when I got to South Carolina, and I started working on fixing some of the things that needed to be fixed, and I decided to go to Oregon, where I had all my stuff in storage. 10 by 20 foot shed. So I went out there and had a yard sale. All my friends came and basically got all my furniture, so when I go visit out there, I see all my things. When I came back, my cousins had found this woman they said was pretty interesting, and they gave me a telephone number. So I called her up and had a blind date. And we hit it off immediately. And she ended up joining this adventure and was with me on the sailboat as we went from South Carolina, sailed right up to Newport. In Newport, I installed a new radar, and the sunny Caribbean beckoned, as it would all sailors. So I headed south to the islands. I first went to Bermuda and then down in through the Lesser Antilles, all the way down to the Grenadines and back to St. Martin. This is what it was like, much more beautiful than Newport in the winter. I'm a diver. Before I got into the sailboat, I obtained my instructor's license for scuba diving. So diving is a big part of it. When I'm sailing, the water is half the adventure below the water, and the other is, of course, the land and the sea. And St. Vincent is where they filmed Pirates of the Caribbean with Johnny Depp. And I anchored off here. This was the view off the back of my, that's the set. This is the view off the back of my boat, and I took my computer and put the DVD in, and my crew and I, the charterers and I, watched the movie of the Pirates of the Caribbean with that in the background. It was really spectacular. I'm in St. Martin, and why not sail to the Med? And all this time I'm putting out my marketing, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to my friends so that they could meet me in foreign ports. So I sailed across to the Azores first, and we spent about a month there, and then into Portugal, through Gibraltar, and to Mallorca. This is my crew. He's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. He runs the group of lawyers, about 35 lawyers, that write the bills that congressmen make. So that he knows a lot of the inside stories, so I got a lot of very interesting tales from him. We're making a Jordan Series drogue. A drogue is a safety device. If your winds are really coming up and you're in big seas, you put that out on the back, and these little parachutes that we were stringing together, about 200 of them, they fill up as the boat starts surfing down the wave, and then when the wave goes past and you slow down, then they go back down again. There's a big weight at the bottom. And so it acts like a bungee cord. It's a safety device. Another boat, actually, we passed another boat while we were sailing, and they took this photo and gave it to me later when we got to the Azores. So that's a real picture of the boat sailing in the North Atlantic. We also had some becalmed times, and we took an opportunity to have a swim. We were actually in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We were 2 miles from land, straight down. If you look down, all the rays of light would just disappear. It was fantastic. We passed the Rock of Gibraltar, very happy, and went to Mallorca. The next we go is eastward. My goal was Croatia, but I kept on extending that and went all the way to Turkey. On the way, we went through the passage between Sicily and the boot of Italy, and it's where Ulysses' whirlpool was all, and we saw this. This is the currents going through the straits. We went to the Kornati Islands. It's a national park in Croatia. It's been written about in a lot of the boating magazines, and that was one of the things that brought me to the Med. That's a picture of the boat. Along the shoreline were these caves, so whenever I had an opportunity, I would go to the caves, and we would take the boat right up next to the caves, and I'd get my crew to go, if they wanted to, go swim inside. We then went through the Corinth Canal, which cuts out the Peloponnesian Peninsula of Greece and goes from the Adriatic into the Greek islands. And finally to Turkey. Marmaris is the big port in Turkey, and we have, this is off the dinghy that we have a 25 horsepower motor and a dinghy that can take 4 scuba divers and get up on a plane, take them anywhere. So it was a powerful enough dinghy to do wakeboarding. These boats here, I want to point out, are goylettes that you can rent for a charter group of up to 15 people, and they will take you on a wonderful trip, a week-long trip or a day-long trip out of Marmaris. We went exploring on land, and there were Roman ruins throughout the shoreline, and they were everywhere, including sarcophagus that would be unearthed and sort of eroding down the hill. It was just amazing. The Romans were all over this peninsula. Oh, here is, we found the mud baths in the Dylan River. That was one of my group. I haven't focused this presentation on the groups that were joining me, but throughout all this trip, we had two staterooms, and people would meet me at various places. Friends and friends of friends, and that's who I was marketing to. It wasn't like a normal charter business. This was for friends. We sailed back from Marmaris and went back to Croatia, went up through the Amalfi Islands of Italy, down back through the Straits, the Messina Straits to Malta, Tunisia, went through the Balearic Islands, and then went out to the Canary Islands. And here are some of the things that happened. I got busted in Croatia. My brother joined me in one town, and it was late in the afternoon, so the next day we took off and went to the other town, and I checked everybody in. And the customs people there said, "You have broken the law." And so they took me into custody and led me through the streets to a magistrate's office. I had to hire an interpreter and talk to the magistrate, and I was fined $300. I'm not sure where the $300 went, but that was, I think, typical of if you break a law in Croatia. And my crew was going along taking pictures, and we were having fun doing it. So there was nothing serious, although I tried to look serious in that picture. We explored the Amalfi Coast and Capri off of Italy, and it's just a beautiful coast with these beautiful towns, Positano and others. And it was just one of the most picturesque. We'd get off and walk through the towns and up into the hills, and it was just gorgeous. Just to the north of the Messina Strait, which is the Sicily, just north of Sicily, is this volcanic island, and it was active. We spent a night, we spent a night drifting just off the shore while the volcano was spewing forth pumice that was hitting on the side of the mountain and rolling down. You could hear it. It was very calm, full moon, and it would go into the water and sizzle. It was just amazing. We visited Tunisia. And when we got to the Atlantic, I found a waterspout. People ask about, dangerous things. If you see a waterspout like that, the first thing you want to do is take a compass reading on it, and then watch it and see if it's going to the left or to the right. And whichever direction it is going, you want to go in the opposite way. If it's coming straight at you, you want to go right angles in one direction or the other, which I did. We got out to Gran Canaria for the recrossing of the Atlantic to St. Lucia. And we recrossed in the Atlantic Rally for Cruisers. This is a race, or a rally that happens every year. The boats that were sailing in the Mediterranean that want to go back to the Caribbean, they wait for the hurricane season in November, and they gather right here in the Canary Islands, and we all go across in a big race. Here's my crack crew. This is my charter that these two friends joined us for the trip across. We took 17 days and averaged 6.5 knots. And we had a curious thing happen to us along the way. We were sailing along, and I looked back, and you might be able to make out a whale. This is a whale in our wake behind the boat, surfing the wave behind us. I'd never seen that before. I was lucky to get that picture. When we got to St. Lucia, we sailed down into Trinidad. The Trinidad Carnival was happening at that time. We were happy to be ashore and back in the North Atlantic. The pitons in St. Lucia, many people have probably seen those from the boats. This is something that not many people see. I love to take my mask and climb up waterfalls, and at the bottom pools in the waterfalls, I would go looking around, seeing what's there. And I invariably would find under the waterfall a crab, just a little crab about this big, and the crab would see me coming, I'm free diving down, and I'm looking at the crab, and the crab's looking at me with his claws raised, say, don't come here, because if you come here, this is my place, this is my special place. From Trinidad, there was the whole Western Caribbean, and I sailed up through the Lesser Antilles, down through South America to the San Blas Islands. We're just north of Dominica, and we see humpback whales. There are about 4 of them with a couple of dolphins. We've gone right over to them. Here they are. They're coming back. We sailed past them, and they're coming back. We were whale watching. This is the whale. You can see the fluke of the whale. It's a big whale just off the front of the boat. I somehow talked Wendy into getting into the water and dragging off the back of the boat. I wish actually now that I had done it myself and had her steer, but she did it. She got in the water. She said just after she got into water, a whale came past her, a 60-foot whale, so close that she could reach out and touch it. She saw its eye looking at her as it went past. It was thrilling, quite frankly thrilling, just off of Dominica. We went to the San Blas Islands. I don't know how many people have been to the San Blas. Oh, great. It's a wonderful set of islands off the coast of Panama with a whole culture of Kuna Indians that have kept their identity. They wear these molas, they're called, on their traditional, the women dress like this all the time. They create their own dugout canoes. We actually went up and saw where they made these and put these sails together and sail out to where the boats are. And the boats are about 4 miles off on the islands of the Kuna, of the San Blas. They bring their traditional molas and do direct marketing to us. And you can see this is one of the most famous of the mola makers, and these molas cost maybe between $15, $20, $25. A really good one is $30. And I brought some examples of them here. The molas are made by sewing 3 pieces of fabric together and then cutting a slit in the fabric on top, and then folding it back and sewing it. The idea, the good ones, you cannot see a stitch, and it's all done by hand. And these things are, they sell them a lot. So we made a collection. The women run the place, sort of like some places here, but it's a matriarchal society, and they have portraits of their ancestors on the walls, and we would visit their houses, and I saw that some of them were peeling, they were old, they were faded, so we went in and took new pictures of them. I had a printer on the boat, and we printed them all up. Here's one of the interesting women. This woman ran her particular island. And you can see the mola she's got on her traditional chemise. Also the pipe. Here's one of the bambinos. Very cute. The sailors would get together and have potlucks. We'd also clean up the islands with trash, and we'd take our own trash from the boats that are burnable, and we'd have a burn pile. So we were sort of custodians of these beautiful islands. After Panama, we decided to take a trip to basically the Honduras. From here, I went down to the Chagas River, which was an adventure in itself, up through Providencia and to the Honduras Bay Islands, which is great for diving, and even up to the Glover's Reef Atoll, which not many people ever get to, and then back to Cartagena. This is an actual giant iguana that we saw in Honduras. Of course, this is Izzy, our entertainer. It's our lizard. And this lizard, other cruisers do this. I don't know if anybody knows about this, but we get these chameleons and bring them on the boat, and they eat any fly or mosquito, or this one particularly loved to eat moths. And I say that because we hung in the main cabin of the boat, we hung this up under one of the lights, right over the table, the main table. And it would glow when the light was on. And our Izzy would crawl up the ceiling and jump onto this, up at the top of the ceiling, and hang over this, looking down into the inside. And when a moth came in, Lizzie would get real excited, and you could see Lizzie get real excited, and then he would jump inside, and we could see the shadows of the whole gladiator experience that he had. We loved Izzy. And later on in Guatemala, I got one of, this is a beaded, became the mascot of the boat. Let's see. So that's Izzy. I miss Izzy. Good job. Okay, we're now in Cartagena in Colombia, and we want to go around on a great trip up to Cuba. I wanted to get to Cuba. And before we did that, we went to the ABC Islands, which are the Dutch Netherlands, Antilles, and then up to Jamaica. Cienfuegos was the big harbor, over to Isla Mujeres in Mexico, down through Lighthouse Reef, which is a beautiful reef, and then into a river in Guatemala called the Rio Dulce. And let me show you a little bit about that. In Bonaire, we had a race week. This was my crew. We had a family, 2 boys, and mother, father, that were on their way to Australia from Boston, in fact, and they were emigrating down there. And they were my crew. We had a friend of ours from that we were introduced from, who's taking the picture. You'll see him in a second, and his wife right here, and their dog. And so we were the crew. And of course we gung-ho crew. This high five, great job, is what I would do after anybody in the crew did anything that was, it was really a sort of, it got everybody up and had them enjoy doing it and doing it again and again. So this was a mantra on our boat. A week later, a storm came up. About 4 hours before this, we were out here on a mooring, just off the shore. And this is on Bonaire, and we pulled into a safe harbor, and then I got a chance to take this picture. So there are storms that come up and winds, but a sailor has to take care. This is a man who joined me on this trip to Jamaica and Cuba. We're raising the Cuban flag here. He wrote an article about it that was published in Sailing Magazine, so we got to be famous, well, at least in our own minds, through an article in Sailing Magazine. I just brought that up here. We were met by this man and 4 of his buddies, all dressed in uniform and boots, and they even had a dog. And they came on board the boat and they left the dog on the dock and came down and were sitting around the table, and for about 5 minutes they were very official. I was filling out some forms, and then I asked them if they would like a beer. And they looked at each other and smiled and said, yeah. And they started relaxing, and I brought out the beer, and it was a Heineken. I'd gotten it in the Dutch West Indies. They looked at the beer, a Heineken. They said, Heineken, oh, good beer. And they all started loosening up, and it just was it became a wonderful experience after that. The customs, the whole documentation was not a problem, and he became one of our best friends. In a bay the size of San Francisco, you'd expect to see a lot of boats. There were about 3 boats in the whole bay, the size of San Francisco Bay. They were made out of styrofoam, and they were fishing boats, and the people were fishing with hand lines, and they just don't have I think all the boats went to Florida. And they're not allowed to have boats that can go to Florida. Of course, we're on the southern coast of Cuba. We took a trip to Havana, the streets, which was very nice, very interesting. This is what the lobsters look like there. The lobsters are so big and so plentiful because nobody goes hunting for them. We got to Isla Mujeres, that's in Mexico, very near Cozumel, and this was an island made by plastic bottles that were caps on, put into a garbage bag, and then they dig a hole underneath where there's earth and things growing, and push the bottles underneath, and as they created the island, it's a floating island. They even have an outboard engine that they can take it around. At this point, we're going up the Rio Dulce River, which is the river going up into a lake in Guatemala, and they call this river the river that swallows gringos, because the gringo sailors would go up this river, took a little bit to go up there, it was about 10 miles, and go into a lake where it was so placid, it was all fresh water, and it was a hurricane hole, so there's no hurricane problems. And previous sailors had created marinas. They just started building out over the mangroves into the lake. And so the gringos would go there, and it was so nice they would stay. And here's part of the reason they'd stay, is because you could go take buses up into the countryside. I went to the kite festival. I don't know, has anybody heard of the giant kite festival in Guatemala? I hadn't, and I flew kites. So what they do is once a year, it's part of the Day of the Dead kind of celebration. The kids would go and from the high schools, and for 2 months beforehand, they would create these incredible designs. They would go to the coast, several days to hike to the coast, find bamboo, big long bamboo, to make these kites, and then they would come back and make them, and then on the special day they would bring them all to the top of the hill where the cemetery was and try to fly them if there was enough wind. They did try to fly these, but there were other kites that went up. And what they do is they bring the souls of their ancestors down from heaven, and they come down with the kites, and then they celebrate for 2 days, and then on the third day they take these kites and they burn them, and the spirits go back up into heaven. So these beautiful kites get destroyed and renewed every year. It's just amazing. There's also Lake Atitlan. You can take a boat around. There are hotels on this lake, and we stayed several days for that. Okay, we're in Rio Dulce. The wind's blowing that way, and so I decided to go against the wind, go to Turks and Caicos. It took us a couple of weeks, but it was well worth it. We were finally back in the Bahamas. We sailed with the wind to Freeport, and sailing downwind through the Bahamas was very nice. Here's one couple that came on board. I knew Olga from Oregon when she was just a little girl, and she grew up and found Jesse, and they got married. And so they came on the boat. Jesse is a kiteboarder. And also while we were there, the prop got fouled. This is the prop. There's this shaft here is the drive shaft going up to the boat where the motor is. The drive shaft broke. And so I had one motor, which is okay, except that on a big catamaran that's 25 feet wide and 47 feet long, 25 feet wide, if you have one motor and you want to turn, say it's on the right, and you want to turn to the right, it's hard to do. So I had to get it fixed. I went to the Grand Bahama Island, to Bradford's Marina there, and had the boat hauled out. And it was there, this is 4 years into the trip, that Wendy decides that she's got to go back and spend more time with her 5 grandchildren, and she's had a little problem with her hands and arthritis. So she left. She said, "I'm leaving, I'm not coming back." Okay. So I fixed the boat, and I had to stay with the boat. I was really married at this point to the boat, and I had commitments to these charters, and one of them was in the Abacos. Friends from Vero Beach. You might recognize these people. This is Marcia Puchatin and Stephanie Hurt. And Stephanie, please stand so everybody knows who you are. She's the reason I am here. We dated in college. We dated in college when she got off the airplane, before she met Bill and had a normal life and a family and everything, and now she was widowed. She got off the airplane and was walking past the plate glass window, and I didn't even talk to her, but I saw her, and I saw this 20-year-old girl that I had dated in college, and my heart just took a little flip. Arthur is really my first name, official name, and somehow she had this hat, and I just fell in love with her, this woman, as you can well imagine. We went up into Man of War Key, and Captain Aubrey is a boat builder, 6th generation, and Marcia knew him from the Grady Bunch. So she introduced me, and we had a great time. He took me back into his boat shed, back into his wood pile, showed me how he made these boats. They've been doing for 6 generations. Okay, exploring the Bahamas. I had several charters in the Bahamas, and this is a lionfish. How many of you know about the lion? Well, how many don't know about the lionfish? Lionfish are from the tropics in the Pacific Ocean, and they were tropical fish that were set loose about 30 years ago into the Caribbean, and they are an invasive species. They aren't normally living here. They came here and started reproducing, and they are everywhere. I saw them in every place that I visited in the Caribbean. They look like this. They've got poisonous spines, and in the Pacific, the groupers have learned how to eat them. They eat them head first, and the spines, they don't get poison. But they haven't adapted here in the Caribbean yet, so they're trying to control them by encouraging all of us to eat them. So if you ever get a lionfish on your menu, go for it. This happened to me. I was just free diving. There's no telephoto on this. This is a spotted eagle ray. And it was right, it came so close that it put its wing right over me. It was spectacular. Okay, we're going north now. We're in the Abacos, and we go up to New Jersey, where I was raised, up through Long Island Sound, which probably a lot of you know, Cape Cod Canal, up into Maine, did some charters up there, and went all the way up to Nova Scotia. Here we are sailing past our childhood yacht, beach club. Stephanie, before she got on the boat, somebody asked her, well, what happens when there's a problem and you have to go home? And it was a 6-day voyage. And so she said, I don't know, I'll ask Lee. And so she asked me, and I said, well, we hove to, we're 400 miles from land, and there's no place to go. So she learned about that. That was her first long distance voyage. So she joined me for this, for the rest of this cruise, and also for later on when I was rebuilding the boat. In Connecticut, my brother has a new child that was going to grade school, and they were doing a benefit auction, so he auctioned off my boat. And this lucky group had from Stanford, had a cruise, a sunset cruise. While I was there in Buzzards Bay, I met this friend of mine who he and his son had visited in the Leeward Islands very early in the trip, 4 years earlier. And he had since bought his own boat, and the two of them were out sailing, heard me talking on the radio, and we had a mid-water rendezvous. Now, this little boy right here, named Zach, this was 5 years earlier. I had been teaching his mother to, I'm an instructor in scuba diving, so I was giving her certification. I wanted him to be involved. Up in Maine, we saw the Maine schooner races. You'll notice that these two boats here are anchored. And these other boats are just sailing right between them. No engines or anything. It was just a phenomenal place and experience. This is Stephanie's home in Nova Scotia. It's a big home that she and her husband had built, and it has a big guest quarters, so everybody's welcome. We're up there for 2 months in the summer, between both August and September usually, so just contact Stephanie. Scott and Penny Busby. Scott and Penny, you're here. It's Penny. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. The two of them are right there. Penny is Stephanie's sister, and Scott, a lot of you know. This is Lunenburg in the background, this beautiful World Heritage Site. Here they are on the boat. And this expression on Scott's face, he would get up there on that wheel and he was in heaven. I have to show you this picture. And Penny too. We're in Nova Scotia, and it's time to head back down south, all the way back to Fort Lauderdale. We went to Maine first, then to Cape Cod, through the canal, and Long Island Sound, all over Long Island Sound, back through where I was born and raised, and Stephanie was raised in Rumson, New Jersey, a lot of the grandchildren there, Chesapeake Bay, then Beaufort, where I'd started, and Fort Pearson finally, where we did some work, and finally Fort Lauderdale. I raced a hurricane single-handed down to New Bedford. It took 2 days, and as I was going south from Maine, Irene was coming north. I had to get inside the breakwater here that was closed up to get safety before Irene arrived. I got there 1 hour before the gates closed. It was quite an adventure. Stephanie and I rode that out. Then we sailed down to South Carolina, where I began a big refitting and rebuilding project. I wanted to work on the engines. That was first. And we took the engines out. I had a dock, a friend had a dock, and we basically started working on the boat. And as I kept on working on the boat, a year and a half later, I was pulling the bird's nests out of the back of the boat. I had worked on the boat for a year, rebuilding, refinishing, putting new fittings, new pumps, rewiring the whole boat. And it was quite a job. It was a labor of love because I loved the boat and I knew I was going to sell it. I brought it down for the final haul out in Fort Lauderdale. This is right in front of a big super boat, super cruiser. Somebody wrote "never enough," and it's just a reference to never enough work on working on your boat, which I think many of the people here understand. Okay, I'd like to just recap and let you know about what this project entailed. It was 6 years plus 2 years of rebuilding. I went 32,000 nautical miles, which is the equivalent of going around the equator 1 1/3 times. I visited 38 countries, and I'd like just to take this opportunity to show you some of the courtesy flags that I've got some helpers too here. All right, we're going to hold these flags up for just a minute, less than a minute, a few seconds, so that the camera can take a pan of them. And these are flags that were actually flown from my mast for many days, in many cases months, in some cases years. And I just wanted to bring them here and let you all see them.
Can you tell us what they are?
They are from all the countries that I went to. Well, I have a little cheater here, so I have written on the flag like France, the British Virgin Islands, and of course you know America, and it just goes on and on. It goes. These are only part of them. We'll leave them here so you can look yourselves if you'd like to see which countries they were. Okay, 38 countries. 82 friends joined me. I didn't show all the pictures of the friends, but they're all up on the website. I had 50 groups, basically, with 82 friends, and some of the friends came multiple times. And I had them pay me. It was a sort of it was $125 a day, and the children under 6 were free. I just loved children aboard the boat. And so it was not a money-making proposition, but it was certainly a lot of fun and helped defray the expenses. And we all worked together. It wasn't like a normal charter. It was just friends exploring. And that was one of the things I really learned. These are pictures of the friends, there are 50 pictures in here. And this is how I marketed to my friends, because this was part of what I wanted to share with you. This was a project, a retirement project. I had a website. And that's the website, and the website had all the information about the charters. I sent out email blasts to my mailing list. I started out with 400 people on the mailing list and ended up with about 700. After every trip, every group that came, I would do a DVD, collect all the pictures that everybody took, digital pictures, and create DVDs. And I wrote a little picture on the front of them and gave it to them before they left the boat. Then I took the 50 best pictures and put them up into the website. I also did a road show from Turkey. I got on a plane and flew to the East Coast, and then Oregon, where I had been living, down to California, out to Hawaii, had some friends in Hawaii, and showed them some pictures of the boat when I was out in Turkey. And that generated quite some interest. If I were going to do this now, it would be quite different, because we have this thing called social media. I would be using Facebook, and I would be using something called video blogs or vlogs. And these are video missives that go on the internet and show what it's like living on the sailboat. What I learned several things. The first is that exploring with your friends is much more fun than just going out there and living on a sailboat and sailing around and doing normal things. Exploring with friends was each time they came, it would be a highlight of my experience. I'd say sell your boat, don't rebuild it. I think everybody understands that. I spent so much time and so much money and so much energy, but I learned a lot, and I was giving love back to this incredible machine that took me on this trip. The other is to trust in yourself. Before I took the trip, I got my captain's license, and I learned a few more things. But the real thing is you're just getting on that boat and starting to sail and learning to deal with everything that comes up. That is the secret. Trust yourself. And trust your dreams. This was a dream. Literally, it just started as a dream out in Oregon. And I manifested it. Trust in your friends, because many people ask their friends to come visit them, but it took a lot of you had to trust that these friends would come, and they did. And finally, for me, trust in love. I started out this as a single man on an adventure. I found Wendy, which is an incredible, wonderful find, and she's living in Texas with her 5 grandchildren and 3 children, all in the same community now. And then of course, Stephanie. And Stephanie is the love of my life, and I'm so happy to be here and sharing this wonderful place, Vero Beach, you all at the Moorings Yacht Club with Stephanie. And I thank you, Stephanie.